Coming up, they've been depicted in films as formidable predators that kill anything that moves. Well, a new study suggests global warming could help locust swarms multiply.
This movement of the locust is their survival strategy.
We discuss whether a policy called blended finance could indeed help poorer countries with their sustainable development goals.
It's using the natural resources of the global south in order to secure energy production for European markets.
And polar bears in the Arctic are starving. What is happening to this top predator? And does anyone still care about an animal that was once the poster child of the climate crisis?
The sea ice is disappearing around the Arctic Ocean extremely rapidly.
Just 2 degrees starts right now. Oil giant Shell has had a toxic history in the Niger Delta. Since oil drilling began in the 1950s, there have been over 7,000 oil spills which have ruined farmland and killed off aquatic ecosystems which locals rely on for their livelihoods. Shell's oil exploitation infrastructure has been crumbling for decades owing to neglect and failure to maintain their pipelines. Oil spill victims, who mostly live around the city of Port Harcourt in the oil-rich Niger Delta, are demanding compensation which would amount to $2 billion. We spoke with Olumide Idowu at the Climate Change Development Initiative about Shell's plan to sell 5 Nigerian oil companies and local concerns about the company absolving its responsibility to restore polluted areas. Talk about the spills Nigerians say were created by Shell and what the main environmental and economic impacts were.
Basically, the Shell spill has been a source of ongoing concern in Nigeria, and with a lot of environmental and community impacts, and it has really, I would call it, as eaten deep into the economy, into the growth, and even into the community activities of the people in the south region of the country. And this is not really something that is very good for the environment and for the growth of the economy. It has taken away food on the table of farmers. It has taken away food from fishermen, and it has killed a lot of health-related issues. And it's something that has led to a significant environmental damage and negative impact on our local communities. And that is why a lot of activists, a lot of advocates have been calling for urgent action so that this will not eat deep. Let me even say it has already eaten deep to the system. And that is why for the past 30-something years, we have been cleaning up the Ogoni and nothing has been done.
And now, before cleaning these environmental spills up, Shell is announcing that it's selling the SPDC, which is the Shell Petroleum Development Company, to Renaissance. Why are Nigerians so worried about that sale?
This sale is for Shell's strategy decision to divert certain assets and even focus on its core operation. It will be crucial, to monitor how this change of ownership impacts operations, community relations, and even environmental standard in the oil sector. Because you cannot hand over a decade of, impacts, negative impact on people. There's a lot that is going on in the Niger Delta. And if we don't speak about it now, our government will not know that this thing is happening. These are kind of investigation that we did from our own pockets. So it is high time for us to start looking at these interwoven issues to see that the damage the oil and gas industry have done to the Nigerian sector have eaten deep, and it has caused a lot of economic, meltdown. So I will say, if we are transiting, we should transiting with an involvement of people. We should now be creating what we call climate adaptation funds. It's like somebody said in the call today that there's money everywhere. It just depends on the kind of project, the kind of mechanism, the kind of approach that we use in approaching those funding mechanisms or approaching those funding opportunities. So investment opportunity is key to drive a future that will lead to community engagement and make the community understand what the government is doing for them.
Blended finance has been a topic of huge debate and controversy. The system entails the use of development finance to attract commercial capital for sustainability and climate-resilient projects in developing countries. But observers criticize the strategy, saying the main recipients of funding, arguably meant to assist those who actually need it, have instead been global conglomerates, major financial intermediaries, and private equity companies.
Blended finance has been presented as a silver bullet to tackle the climate crisis. But a joint report by NGOs Eurodad and Action Aid suggests this method of combining private and public funds to finance climate projects relies heavily on extracting natural resources from the global south to fund the Western world's transition to renewable energy. Here are some examples from 2016 to 2021. Philanthropic organizations, commercial banks, and insurance companies were recruited for blended investment projects in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Projects included a solar power plant in Zambia, an energy transition partnership in South Africa, and Rwanda's Kigali Water Project. While all these projects came online and benefited local people to some degree, this silver bullet did more harm than good. Nearly 80% of those investments were repatriated to international corporations and project developers in the global north, and according to Convergence, the global network for blended finance, the least developed countries received only 27% of the total financing. Experts say the financial model increases poor nations' debt by channeling funds through loans and ultimately linking global warming, biodiversity loss, and climate disasters to profitability. They add that blended finance projects in the renewable sector are essentially a subsidy to global north investors, and these schemes are simply vehicles for exploiting the global south's resources.
When you look at the reality of this type of finance, it's actually continuing the extractive nature of economic relations between the global north and the global south. The reason is because in Africa in particular, we only attract less than 2% of global finance that is destined to renewable energy investments. But the majority of the renewable energy that is produced is actually exported to Europe to secure energy security for Europe, rather than delivering to the 600 million people in Africa who have no access to electricity today. So it's purely extractive, even though it's concessional finance at low interest rate, but it's extractive. It's using the natural resources of the global south in order to secure energy production for European markets.
What do you say to academics who've said that blended finances focus on private investments in global south energy projects is linked to profitability?
It's actually worse than that. I can give you one example. Look at the renewable energy investments in Namibia, for example, the green industrial zone. Everything sounds good. It's green investments, green electricity, green industrialization for job creation. Namibia is water poor and has severe droughts, and the majority of the investment is to produce green hydrogen, which requires massive amounts of water, which is coming from seawater desalination that creates a huge ecological negative impact because of the sea salt that is dumped back in the ocean, raises the salinity, warms the water, and destroys the blue economy. And you can say, okay, let's ignore that. It's for the purpose of development. For the purpose of industrialization. Except the type of manufacturing that is put into the green industrial zone is the assembly line manufacturing that is no longer needed in the global north, is outsourced to Namibia at low cost of labor, is used to assemble products that are then shipped without having to pay the CBAM tax, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism tax, which means that this green industrialization with European investment is actually an inflation management tool for the European economy, and it's a trade weapon against other competitors who don't have access to green industrialization, so to speak. But from the Namibian side, it's actually locking Namibia at the bottom of the global value chain and perpetuating the colonial role that was imposed on African countries, which is we're the place for the cheap raw materials, we're the consumers of industrial output from the north, and most importantly, we're the place where obsolete technologies, assembly line manufacturing that is no longer needed in the global north is delivered to us under the label of development and cooperation. So blended finance is this new instrument that is used to recreate the colonial economic role that is imposed on the South with greenwashing labels to purely benefit the global north economies.
The world is currently trying to figure out how to fund the loss and damage fund that was announced at COP28 last year. Do you think the fund should be funded through blended finance?
Well, let's be very clear about what the Loss and Damage Fund is about. We have the global north, the historic polluters that have exceeded their carbon budget by far, owe a climate debt to the global south. The global south countries that haven't contributed and haven't exceeded their carbon budget. So if I owe you $100, I'm supposed to pay you my debt. I'm not supposed to lend you money and then control the way you use that money. I'm not supposed to give you money and then ask in return for you to give me access and control over your forest under the label of carbon markets, for example. I'm not supposed to give you money and investments and ask that you produce green energy for my markets, for my benefits. I'm just supposed to pay you the debt. So we have to change the terms of this conversation about climate finance. It's not supposed to be loans and further economic entrapment. It's supposed to be climate reparations, as in financial transfer of resources, in-kind transfer of resources, transfer of technology to invest in climate adaptation for the global south, not for the purpose of extraction to benefit the global north.
From the world of finance to food for bears, a new study has found global warming is literally starving polar bears. In Canada's Hudson Bay, the polar bear sits on top of the food chain and gets most of its calories from seal meat. But with sea ice disappearing, there's not much to sit on for the polar bears or the seals. Researchers observed 20 bears in the region attempt to adapt by hunting and foraging on land for prey, berries and grass. But the bears used more calories than they gained, losing an average of 1 kilogram a day. The most vulnerable, the study found, are the cubs.
Those bears are smaller, given their younger age compared to an adult bear. As a result of their small size, they're not able to accumulate as much body fat as a larger bear would be able to do. Also, they're not as experienced as an adult bear would be, so they aren't as skilled at catching seals while the sea ice is present. And so ultimately, they end up on land with lower accumulations of body fat that they would need to survive this increasing period on land relative to an adult bear.
And a new study revealed previous estimates of ice sheets melting in Greenland had underestimated the problem by 20%. They were based on measurements of sea ice loss within a fixed perimeter and missed 1,000 gigatons of melting. But researchers are now manually recording the edges of ice sheets and using artificial intelligence to track melting where a glacier usually actually meets the sea. New technology also allows researchers to study the problem on a much larger scale. Studies say that by the year 2100, Greenland will shed ice at a faster rate than any period in the last 12,000 years and will contribute to sea level rise 6 times as much as previous models predicted. So where do you think in the world will experience rising sea levels as a result? Who needs to be most worried about this news?
Well, pretty much everyone is going to experience rising sea level, whether we're talking about the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Marmara. The entire global ocean is linked. So the only places that may not have to worry about the rate of sea level rise are those that are experiencing tectonic uplift, so where the land is coming up. And those tend to be places very far up north. But the vast majority of the planet is going to experience rising sea level. And the places that need to be the most concerned, as you might imagine, are those places that are the lowest. So, Bangladesh, Pacific Island nations, where the entire country is maybe 1 or 2 meters above sea level rise. Small nations, broad coastal plains, low-lying areas where there's a lot of people and a lot of development. Those are the places that we're worried about.
You know, the Pacific Islands and the Caribbean islands come to mind, of course. I know this might be a naive question to ask, but what would it take for ice sheets to come back from this?
Well, you have to understand that ice sheets are in balance with the global temperature. So for us not to lose any ice from the ice sheets or from the glaciers, you need to have as much precipitation falling as snow in the winter as you melt in the summer. Today, we're melting more than we receive in precipitation, and we expect that to increase. So the only way to change that calculus is to cool the planet. I mean, that's really the only prospect for trying to reverse the changes in the ice sheets and to reverse this prospect of accelerating rising sea level.
Artificial intelligence has been instrumental in this new study. Do you think, though, there's been a lot more melting than we currently know of?
Well, certainly what the latest studies have shown is that we weren't adequately understanding what was happening at the edges of the Greenland ice sheet. So there are a lot of small glaciers that come off of the ice sheet and pour into the ocean. And we had not been adequately accounting for the rate at which those small glaciers at the edges of the Greenland ice sheets were shrinking. And so certainly we were surprised to learn from these very recent studies that we were off by maybe 20% for the rate at which the ice sheet was shrinking. That means we were also incorrect in the degree to which melting of the Greenland ice sheet and those glaciers was contributing to global sea level rise.
I've got a question about polar bears, those in the Arctic. Do you think, well, because of a study that came out saying that many of them are starving because the ice is melting so fast in that region, could polar bears figure out how to survive out of the icy regions and prevent the species from going extinct?
You know, I think that what we're seeing right now is that the answer to your question is probably not. I mean, the situation is bleak. The polar bears don't really need the large ice sheet as much as they need the sea ice. And this is the ice that forms on top of the ocean from the salt water. And the sea ice is disappearing around the Arctic Ocean extremely rapidly. And that is a critical part of the polar bear's habitat, and especially the areas that they use to get food, and the degree to which they can adapt to those incredibly rapid changes, we don't really know, but the prospects are not good, I'm afraid.
Since biblical times, locusts have had a terrible reputation as a plague, and for good reason. A single swarm can number in the billions, spread over more than 1,000 square kilometers, and when the conditions are just right, or wrong perhaps, they can even blot out the sun. They also do serious damage as they devour nearly all the plant life they find. A study in the journal Science Advances suggests heat waves, droughts, and deluges could create favorable conditions for locusts to spread even further, expanding their reach in West India and Central Asia by 5% in the near future, but by as much as 25% in the next 50 to 80 years. So, what a fascinating insect, beginning with the fact that eggs can stay in the ground for decades, waiting for favorable conditions. Just talk about these favorable conditions that locusts need.
I have to say immediately that eggs cannot stay for decades in the soil. The eggs' viability in the soil is only about 1 year and a half, not more. So unfortunately, there are many myths, many assumptions against locusts, and some of them are not correct. However, these are really fascinating insects which can travel very long, they can cross, for example, Atlantic Ocean in big swarms. They can cover hundreds of kilometers per day, and they are probably the biggest congregations of animals on Earth. They depend on the sun and on solar energy and on temperature to develop. That means that, for example, they cannot survive when the temperatures are below 0 centigrade. That is why certainly global warming in general is very beneficial for the locusts, because locusts develop faster, they can produce more generations per year, and they can also be more fecund, produce more offspring. So in general, global warming is beneficial for locusts.
What makes this normally solitary insect form a swarm and connect with others to create a mega swarm? And how do they communicate?
It should be understood that there is not just one locust, because there are at least a dozen of species of locusts with different biology, different behavior, different ecology. So at this point, we know more or less about 2, 3, 4 maybe locust species, and we understand the process as you described, from turning from the solitary, shy, and a very sedentary insect into this moving, living in big groups, and flying in big swarms. We know that usually it is the environmental conditions that govern this process. For example, for the desert locust, it is rains in the desert. How often can be a rain in the desert? Maybe once in 20 years. But during this rain, the dormant seeds of plants starts to grow, and immediately locusts come there to feed and to lay eggs. That's how they start to get together. And from solitary insect, they become gregarious.
Is it correct to say that the locusts, they move with the wind? And if that is true, what does that mean for their success?
That is correct, because locusts indeed, they follow the so-called intertropical pattern of weather fronts. So because weather fronts are bringing rain, locusts feel that, and that's how they move, trying to get to this place where at least 25 millimeters of rain fell. That is enough for them to lay eggs and to produce offspring. So yes, locusts are moves with the wind. Also, we need to understand that this movement of the locust is their survival strategy. They survive because they need to find areas with green vegetation. To do that, they follow the wind.
Interesting. Is there a way to interrupt the locust swarming process, I wonder?
This is a very good question. In fact, there are different approaches. One of them, what we call prevention strategy. Instead of trying to combat locusts when they are in a fully blown outbreak, it is better to prevent locusts from getting together. In this case, the initial groups, initial congregations of locusts are treated with pesticides usually, and this prevents them from getting in big groups. However, now there are also very interesting methods. We are still only exploring them, genetic methods, and some other scientific approaches to make locusts not to swarm. Unfortunately, at this moment, this is still in the future. We cannot say that we mastered locust genomics because we are making only first steps in this direction.
A lot of movies, while I was doing my research, I realized that depict locusts as these dangerous animals, insects that target and kill anything that moves. So can you answer whether or not locusts attack humans?
Well, this is again one of the myths which is associated with these fascinating insects. Fortunately for us, locusts are vegetarians. They do not attack humans, and they do not transmit any diseases, any viruses or bacteria or something. Uh, Certainly, sometimes locusts can be cannibalistic. They can feed on their brothers and sisters because they need to get additional protein and salt to produce offspring. But other than that, no, certainly locusts are not that dangerous as we like to portray them.
And that's our show. But before we part ways, take a look at these pictures. The aftermath of forest fires in Colombia, where summer temperatures have exceeded historical records. There were more than 400 forest blazes there in January alone. Countless animals and plants have died. And authorities are worried that with El Nino still about, drought conditions could extend until April.